Hi, everybody. I'm really excited to be talking to you all today. I know that your theme for the week is becoming the person you want to be, and that as a part of that, Isabella has had you reading about the sort of unequal distribution of the American dream. And this is a topic I'd like to touch on a little bit more through the avenue of boxing films, actually. So, a little bit of background into how I got into that area is that I'm initially a film scholar and I'm going into that sort of avenue. But last semester, I had to finish my honors seminar requirements, and the only class that was really available for me in my schedule was one on race and sports. And these are two issues that I didn't honestly know a ton about, but I was interested in learning about and learning about how they could intersect. So I took the class and I really gave it a shot, and it was extremely eye-opening for me. And it genuinely changed my worldview and informed me a lot about these different issues, especially in America. And as a part of that class, I did a final project looking at cinematic portrayals of Black heavyweight champions and what that shows about the society that is making the movies. So I'd like to give you part of that presentation today, not the full thing. And to start with, I'd like to give some background on the actual boxer, Joe Louis, who was heavyweight champion from 1937 until 1949. Becoming the heavyweight champion is already a really remarkable accomplishment, but especially for Lewis, because he was only the second ever Black man to hold the title, right after Jack Johnson, who won the heavyweight title in 1908. Something to note about Johnson is that he was a very sort of boisterous and very proud man, and white society did not like that. They really resented that, and they punished him a lot for essentially for his blackness, which led to his financial downfall and his very untimely death, which is quite tragic. So after Johnson, Black men weren't given the opportunity to even contend for the title or to really fight in high profile fights that would get them up to the point where they could even try to be heavyweight champion. That is until Joe Louis came along in the mid 1900s. And because everyone was so around him was so worried about what had happened to Jack Johnson, he had a very carefully crafted image of himself made by the people around him. So his managers, for example, had a very strict set of rules that Joe Louis had to follow at all times, like in terms of having his picture taken, he had certain things he had to do, or in the ring, he couldn't smile over his opponents because that would seem too, prideful, like Jack Johnson had been. So, despite all of these, or perhaps because of these very strict rules, he was able to eventually fight and become the champion. And it really dictated like a lot of his life and a lot of his public persona. And so not long after becoming the champion, he really elevated to the status of an American hero. In 1938, he fought a German man named Max Schelling, and Max Schmeling was essentially the icon of Nazi Germany at the time and really heralded as a hero by Nazi Germany. So for them to fight one another, it really became more of a fight against countries and against ideologies, excuse me. So we had on one hand Schmeling, who was, like I said, the figure for Nazi Germany and Aryan supremacy. And then on the other hand, we had Joe Louis, who was really representing American democracy and those various ideals. So Louis winning this fight was extremely pivotal for socio-political culture at the time. And he afterwards even enlisted in the army, and he was really instrumental in raising funds for the army that way. So he was truly an American hero and beloved by the majority of people in America at this point. Even so, he came back from the war facing a really immense amount of debt. And that was because although he had made millions and millions of dollars throughout his professional career, he saw a very, very small portion of that money himself. And most of it went to his white managerial team. And they were also the ones responsible for his funds and for his taxes. So he came back to the States after serving in the army, facing a lot of tax issues. And he had always been very generous with his money, giving to the army, to his surrounding community, a lot to his family and to Detroit and where he was from, and all of these things. Even so, he ended up owing the IRS hundreds of thousands of dollars. And despite being past his prime, he was essentially forced to continue fighting in fights he couldn't win against younger and more fit boxers because he had to pay off this money that he hadn't intentionally set out to owe. It was just the circumstances surrounding and the way that his managerial team had controlled him as a Black man, really. And so as he was trying to pay off this money, there was, interest. So the debt just really ballooned. And he ended up owing, even though he was trying to pay off the money doing fights, he ended up owing over $1 million to the government, which really ultimately led to his downfall. We'll talk about that a little bit more later. But as a part of this era where he was fighting in these various fights to try to pay off his debt, he ended up fighting a boxer named Rocky Marciano. And that is the plot of this film from 1953, the Joe Louis story, which does follow his life, though he doesn't play himself in the film. Essentially, something that's interesting to note is that this is an era where originally boxing cinema had been very much like the picture on the left here, outside the ring looking in. And this was around the era where we start to step into the ring and we start to see boxers up close talking to, like you can see in the middle picture, talking to their coaches, their managers. We can see their expressions while they're fighting. And that really represents a desire for the public and the consumer to get a more in-depth understanding of the emotions of the boxer at this point, which is quite notable. We want to know Joe Louis. We want to understand him, and the framing of the movie shows this. An interesting thing to note, though, is that we're trying to understand Joe Louis through a white narrator. So the entire film is framed around a white character named Tad Majian, who is a newspaper man who's essentially narrating the Joe Louis story. Joe Louis is not allowed to tell his own story, which is, I find, quite significant. And we can see here in this quote at the bottom, this is how the movie ends, is with the character, Tad Majian, saying that, Joe lost his wife, lost his title, lost his money, but out of it all, he found himself. And I know him better than anyone else. And I see this as not an end, not a downfall, but as a beginning and as an opportunity for him. This is just egregiously untrue. This era in which Joe Louis lost very deeply and in a very embarrassing way to Rocky Marciano was not a beginning for him. It was an end of his professional boxing career. He retired once and for all from professional boxing following this fight. In no way was this a beginning, or at least a beginning of anything but his downfall. So this is really very representative of how media might falsely sort of represent real boxers and the real struggles that they go through when trying to achieve this American dream that we love to herald, especially in the sports world. This doesn't just extend to real world people and movies about real world people. So to show that, I included Creed 3, which is the latest installment in the Rocky franchise. And I felt this would be interesting to include here because it's the movie you all have been most likely to see because it's so recent, and because it stars, of course, Michael B. Jordan as the fictional boxer Adonis, who is initially the heavyweight champion until his childhood friend Damien takes the title from him. And so the movie follows him trying to reclaim that title, which is, again, very representative of the chase for success and the chase for that American dream. I've included here at the bottom a statue, a real life statue outside the Philadelphia Museum of Art, which depicts the character Rocky from the very first movie, played by Sylvester Stallone, to sort of indicate how cinematic depictions can have genuine and immense influence on our real world perceptions and belief systems. So here we are heralding in our real world Rocky, this fictional boxer, as the sort of pinnacle of the American dream of success, of Philadelphia pride, which is very notable because there are actual Black boxers from Philadelphia who were very successful and very talented, and yet the statue goes to this fictional character. So I think that speaks a lot to the power that cinema has, and that's why I'm analyzing it in this avenue to begin with. So here is a very specific shot, a set of shots from the film. You can see we're very up close, we're very personal. In the last slide, which I'll briefly go back to, we have very dynamic shots. So again, we're very focused on seeing who these people are, how they're reacting to their experience, how they're, responding to their environment and to the people around them pursuing their journey. So, like I said, here we can see we're very up close. We can see eye to eye. We have Creed, we have Anderson. We can see how they're feeling. And then we have their boxing shorts. You'll notice that Creed's shorts are white and they feature the stars and stripes. So he is really truly representing America. He is the all-American boy, the American dream, if you will. Meanwhile, we immediately see Anderson's shorts, which feature the colors that are in most of the flags of countries in Africa and represent them seeking out their independence. So what we really ultimately have is, again, much like the actual Lewis Schmeling fight back in the day, we in a lot of ways are showing a movie not just about two fighters, but about two opposing ideologies, whatever that might be, and whatever the film is arguing that those may be. My goal is to show that clearly Creed is the American dream. He's already achieved that. He had already had his title, and he's wearing the stars and stripes on his shorts. Ultimately, he does uphold the American dream through this film. This is a major spoiler for the end of the movie, but he does through just hard work, through wanting it enough. There's a beautiful training montage, and in the last fight, he comes out victorious and he reclaims his title despite being less skilled potentially than his opponent. And that really shows that we are sort of, we'll get into this, the success ethic implications. So what is the show? The way that Adonis has, become a pillar of the American dream and he's reclaimed his title. You might think, so what? It's good cinema. I agree. I loved the movie. But we really do have to address the actual real world and potentially negative implications of this sort of success ethic rhetoric. That's what I call it. It is very tied as well to the American dream. All of these things are based around the core idea of meritocracy, which is essentially the concept that we win rewards and we are rewarded based on merit alone, based on our abilities and based on the hard work that we put in. So Adonis Creed, for example, doesn't reclaim his, champion title because, he's coming from a point of privilege or any of these things because he has better access to trainers or equipment. He wins because he wanted it more and because he worked harder. That is what all of these movies and in general, sports culture wants us to believe. They really uphold this idea, which is very interconnected. Here you can see at the bottom, American values, sports culture, these are tied to meritocracy in the sense that we believe very wholeheartedly in a level playing field, both in terms of sports and in terms of American business, American society, etc., where we're all approaching it on a level based playing field. And as long as we work hard and as long as we try and as long as we want it enough, we will succeed. Of course, you can see in the actual lives of many of these, for example, athletes like Joe Louis, or even in the chapter you read in the book about the American dream. And you can see in her story, the American dream is something that we might really enjoy to believe, but ultimately have to understand is in many ways an illusion, or at least not distributed and available evenly to all of us. Meritocracy might be something very, very hopeful and something that we want to believe in, and we want to believe very deeply in it. And everything in our lives, from sports to movies to business, it wants us to believe this. But ultimately, certain people do have privileges that set them apart from others. And in many ways, an individual's success or eventual downfall is not tied to their hard work, but rather to the external pressures that are placed upon them. So Joe Louis was perhaps one of the hardest working men in American sport history. Even so, external factors, tax problems, etc., led to his immense downfall. He ended up eventually, you can see in this picture here, he ended up eventually working as a greeter in Caesar's Palace here in Vegas because he needed money and it was a pity job that had been offered to him. That is not the natural endpoint for someone that had worked as hard as he had if meritocracy were entirely true, as we would have it believe, and if the American dream were as equally accessible as we would want. What is the ultimate reason that I'm telling you all of this? It's definitely not to sort of perpetuate the idea that the American dream is a complete myth and is entirely false. And so you shouldn't work because it doesn't matter. That's not what I'm trying to say. We can see, for example, in the chapter that you read, she faced immense hardship and external pressures that really prevented her from accessing the American dream in the same way as the people around her. Even so, she ended up in a very successful place. And in a lot of ways, hard work does pay off. And that is something that is often intertwined with privilege, but nonetheless, we should work hard. We should try to become the most well-rounded, the most actualized people that we're capable of. My goal really is just to try to instill this sense of awareness and empathy for others. We are all going about our own individual journeys, trying to achieve success, essentially going along our American dream paths. And it's really valuable to recognize that that path is not equally accessible to everyone and doesn't look the same for everyone. The privileges that I've had in my life that have allowed me to get to this point and to chase my American dream are privileges for me, but they might be hurdles for somebody else. And it's just very valuable to recognize that. And at the same time, in a more personalized way, I really want to instill the idea in all of you to try to make the most of this college experience and specifically of the honors college experience in your journey to become the best person you can be or the person that you want to be, because it's very easy, for example, with this class that I took, this race and sports class, it would have been very easy for me to treat it as just a requirement that I needed to graduate and to graduate through the honors college. Instead, I genuinely tried to challenge myself, and it immensely expanded my worldview and just the way that I look at the society around me. And instead of just taking it at that surface level, doing the steps that I had to do to pass the class and then move on, I really tried to incorporate what I was learning through this class into my own future career, which was film analysis. So doing this final project in this way, I really tried to think outside of the box and connect the things that I found very personally impactful with the things that the class was teaching to get the most out of the experience. And in a lot of ways, this class and the experience of learning on all of these new topics and doing this project really helped me become the person that I wanted to be and helped me address academia, but also the outside world in a much more fulfilling and novel way that I hadn't previously. So that's another message that I really want to instill in all of you is that, we should be working hard. We should have empathy for other people and the journeys that they may be on and how external factors may influence their journeys. And ultimately, we're all just trying to do our best. And it is definitely possible, especially with the help of, empathy for others. So thank you very much. I hope you all got something out of this. If you have any questions or comments or anything, feel free to reach out to Isabella and she can forward the comments to me. I'm more than happy to talk about any of this if any of you are interested. And I'm really excited to see where all of your paths end up. And I hope you end up becoming the best person that you want to be. Okay. Bye, everybody.